Howdy YouTube, and welcome back to another episode from this series of videos where I have been building a physically modeled analog tape emulator in software. In another episode, I'm going to show you how to build it from scratch in Max for Live so you can use that device to create some awesome analog sounding music in Ableton. But in this episode, I want to spend some time diving deeper into the physics. And part of that is just because it's pretty fun to watch these little magnetic animations float around. But the other part of it is that if by understanding the physics, that's how we can unlock these higher quality software versions that can realistically capture that analog tape sound. So what I'm showing here represents molecules that are currently unmagnetized. I've got this magnetization knob set to 0. And when the material is not magnetized, the molecules are basically just going to float around and point in random directions, and they're just kind of randomly jostling around because there's thermal energy in the system. If I turn this temperature way up, they're just going to kind of freak out and spin around really fast. And if I turn it way down, they're just going to lock into place because there's currently no energy in the system in this visualization. And these little yellow arrows pointing out of the molecule represents the molecule's magnetic moment. Basically, each molecule generates its own magnetic field. It's like a tiny little magnet with a north and a south pole, and these magnetic field lines that emanate out of it. And they point, just like a magnet, they point in a specific direction. But since this material is unmagnetized, it's pointing in different directions, all these little magnetic moments are going to cancel out. Like we've got this one's pointing a little bit to the right, this one's pointing a little bit to the left, and basically these all cancel out, and the net magnetic field generated by all these molecules ends up being 0 or somewhere close to that. So if we want to magnetize this material, usually you would need to apply some external magnetic field, and that will cause all these magnets to align with the magnetic field. And once they are aligned, they're magnetized. So now they're all pointing in the same direction. And since there's millions and billions of these, tiny little weak magnets, but contributed together, they create a decently strong magnetic field. And it's strong enough in the case of magnetic tape that if we were to remove the magnetic field, like, say take the piece of tape off of the tape recorder, it will hold kind of its magnetic state. And we can actually get the tape player to sort of record whether it was strongly magnetized, weakly magnetized, or even magnetized in the reverse direction. Basically, we can get the tape to hold the magnetic state proportional to kind of some input current, some input electrical signal, and that's how we're going to be able to record to the tape. And if we zoom out of the molecular level and look at this kind of system diagram of a tape recorder, now we can get a better picture of what's actually going on to be able to store information on the tape. This tape head is generating the external magnetic field, which aligns the molecules, and you can see over here the molecules are kind of randomly aligned. This is showing the magnetic field within the tape is, has a random orientation. This is kind of the 0 state of magnetic tape. But then as this tape player moves forward, whatever this signal current is, say we have some alternating waveform coming in, then we get this magnetic state to sort of oscillate from being like strong, then a little bit weaker, then a reversing direction, and then being stronger in the reverse direction, just like this input current was oscillating around. And that's how we can store music on magnetic tape. What we end up capturing is a distorted version of the original clean input signal that we sent into the tape recorder. What I'm showing here represents that kind of transformation process. So this left signal in a tape recorder would represent the external magnetic field that we are generating from our tape recorder. Like we're sort of converting electricity into this electromagnetic field that is going to align the molecules of our tape reel. And so you can see here when the blue arrow is around 0, the molecules are kind of pointing in random directions. But once we strongly point the external magnetic field in one direction, all the molecules will align with it, and likewise you can align them in the reverse direction. But this kind of process, even though it's proportional and it captures a signal that's representative of our our music or our audio, it's distorted. And part of that is due to saturation. So basically, as the molecules get aligned, you can't keep aligning them more and more. There's just a limit to how aligned they can get. So if you keep driving your input signal further and further and creating the stronger and stronger magnetic field, your output's not going to get stronger and stronger. It's going to kind of hardline or flatline towards this minimum value here, or the positive value on the top. And then the other distortion is coming from the fact that the molecules sort of resist going from a magnetized state to an unmagnetized state. So you can see here we're going down, but our magnetized state stays high for quite a bit longer. So this is what I describe as the kind of magnetization process being sticky. It wants to stick to the negative and positive rails of our signal, and that is why recording to tape creates such a loud signal, because by spending extra time at those positive and negative rails, our average amplitude of our signal is greater, and this is going to create a really loud waveform at our output. That distortion we get as we recorded the tape is best described by this nonlinear transfer function over here, which has a hysteresis loop. And this hysteresis loop, it's kind of like a wave shaper, if you remember my video on wave shaping, but it's like a dynamic wave shaper. And what I mean by that is kind of can break it into two parts. The wave shaper part means that there's just some nonlinear relation between the input and the output. And we can see that behavior we saw with aligning the molecules, that after we bring this tape into the saturating region, we have to work really hard to unmagnetize those molecules. So you have to, this is our input signal right here. If this is at max state, you have to get this input signal all the way back here, be way negative, to get your output signal to just get back to zero. So this is the hysteresis curve, and this is actually a simplified look at it for just one amplitude of the input signal. But in reality, if you have various amplitudes, your transfer function is very complicated. And that's why it's tricky to nail tape emulations. And that's why we're going to be looking at a physics-inspired tape emulations. So thankfully, we do not have to figure out how to come up with these complicated physics equations from scratch. We can borrow from existing works. So this is a paper from Jatin Chowdhury. I'll give a link in the description. It's called Physical Modeling for Analog Tape Machines. And basically, we can use this equation right here to get this tape-like behavior, this hysteresis loop out. And it will be very accurate, and we can kind of tune the parameters to sound like different tape machines. It's really cool. And this is a differential equation. So let me just quickly, this output would be labeled M here. That's how Chowdhury calls it. So this equation says this is how the output will change. This is how we're going to sort of increase or decrease the output as our input H changes. But the interesting thing about this process is that our output kind of changes how this whole algorithm works. So that's what makes it kind of like a recursive function. So this second equation down here, this is the Runge-Kutta solver, and this is the second thing we're going to need to implement in Max for Live next episode, so we can use this continuous time physics equation in sort of like a discrete digital signal processing software that operates sample by sample. Hopefully that sounds interesting to you as well, and I'll see you next episode.